Nightfall crept across the vast Wyoming plains as Nora Blackwood clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest, the child's feeble cries barely audible over the howling wind. It was 1878, and the bitter October air cut through her threadbare shawl like knives, but she pressed on, one agonizing step after another, toward the distant glow of what she prayed was a town. 3 days without proper food had left her dizzy and weak. Her milk was drying up. Little Sarah, just 4 months old, was growing weaker by the hour. Nora's husband Thomas had promised them a better life out west. Instead, he had gambled away their savings in Cheyenne before abandoning them both at a stagecoach stop with nothing but a half-empty carpetbag and the clothes on their backs. "Just a little farther, sweet girl," Nora whispered, her cracked lips brushing against her daughter's forehead. "Mama will find us something soon." But as the last of her strength ebbed away, Nora's knees buckled beneath her. She managed to twist her body as she fell, protecting Sarah from the impact. The child wailed in protest, her tiny face red with hunger and exhaustion. "I'm sorry," Nora sobbed, cradling her daughter as they huddled in the tall grass beside the rutted trail. "I'm so sorry." The approaching sound of hoofbeats barely registered through her despair. It wasn't until a deep voice called out that she lifted her tear-streaked face. "Madam." "You all right down there?" A tall figure dismounted from a chestnut stallion, approaching cautiously. The man's face was obscured by the brim of his worn Stetson, but she could see the concern in his movements. "Please," Nora whispered, her voice barely carrying, "my baby, she needs milk, food." "Anything?" The stranger knelt beside her, pushing back his hat to reveal a weathered face, perhaps 30 years of age, with eyes as blue as a summer sky and a jawline shadowed with several days' growth of beard. "Name's Russell Wade," he said, his gaze taking in their desperate condition. "My ranch is just over that ridge. Can you stand, madam?" When Nora tried and failed to rise, Russell didn't hesitate. With gentle efficiency, he lifted both mother and child into his arms and carried them to his horse. Nora was too weak to protest as he settled her in the saddle, handed her the baby, then mounted behind her, one strong arm securing her against his chest. "Hold on tight," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I've got you both now." The journey to the ranch was a blur to Nora, consciousness fading in and out as exhaustion claimed her. She was vaguely aware of arriving at a modest but well-kept homestead, of being carried into a warm kitchen, of a kindly older woman exclaiming in alarm, "Russell, what in heaven's name?" "Found them on the South Trail, Martha. They're half-starved. The baby needs milk right away." "Lord have mercy, bring her here quick." Nora fought to stay awake as her daughter was gently taken from her arms. "Please, don't take her." "It's all right, madam," Russell assured her, easing her into a chair near the stove. "Martha's raised 6 children of her own. Your little one's in good hands." The older woman, Russell's housekeeper, Nora would later learn, was already preparing a bottle of diluted cow's milk with practiced efficiency. "Poor mite's famished. What's her name, dear?" "Sarah," Nora managed, watching anxiously as Martha tested the milk's temperature before offering it to the infant. Sarah latched onto the bottle with desperate hunger. "My name is Nora, Nora Blackwood." "Well, Miss Nora, you just sit tight while I fix you something to eat," Russell said, already moving to the stove. "Martha, can you get the spare bedroom ready after the little one's fed?" "Already thinking on it," the older woman replied, rocking Sarah gently as she drank. True to his word, Russell soon placed a bowl of hearty stew before Nora. The rich aroma made her stomach clench painfully, reminding her how long it had been since she'd eaten. "Slow now," he cautioned as she lifted the spoon with trembling hands. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Though it took all her willpower, Nora heeded his advice, savoring each spoonful while watching her daughter, now content in Martha's arms, her tiny belly full for the first time in days. "Thank you," Nora whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how I can ever repay your kindness." Russell's expression softened as he sat across from her. "No need for talk of payment, Miss Blackwood. Out here, we look after folks in trouble. It's just the way of things." "I don't want to impose. Once we're rested, we'll move on." "To where?" he asked gently. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Nora's tears spilled over. She had nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. Just the crushing weight of responsibility for the tiny life depending on her. "You and your little girl will stay here until you're properly recovered," Russell said, his tone brooking no argument. "After that, we'll figure things out together." Later that night, as Nora lay in a real bed for the first time in weeks, her sleeping daughter beside her in a makeshift crib fashioned from a drawer, she allowed herself to wonder about the man who had saved them. There was kindness in those blue eyes, yes, but something else too, a sadness, perhaps, or a loneliness that mirrored her own. Morning brought clarity and with it, embarrassment. In the light of day, Nora was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the charity she was accepting. Still, the smell of coffee and bacon drew her from the bedroom, Sarah cradled in her arms. Russell was alone in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up as he tended the stove. He turned at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You're looking better already. How's the little one?" "She slept through the night for the first time in weeks," Nora replied, returning his smile tentatively. "Mr. Wade, Russell, please," he interrupted, gesturing for her to sit. "And no more talk of leaving just yet. Martha's gone to town for supplies, including proper baby things. She'd never forgive me if you disappeared before she got back." Over breakfast, Nora learned that Russell had inherited the modest cattle ranch from his father 5 years earlier. He ran it with the help of Martha, who had been the family's housekeeper since Russell was a boy, and 2 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the corral. "It's not much compared to some spreads," he admitted, "but the land's good and the cattle are healthy. We get by." When he asked about her circumstances, Nora hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. But there was no judgment in Russell's eyes, only patient concern. So she told him everything: her hasty marriage to Thomas after her parents died, his promises of adventure in the West, the gradual revelation of his gambling problem, and finally, his abandonment. "He said he was going for supplies," she finished quietly, cradling Sarah against her shoulder. "But he took what money we had left. I waited 2 days before I realized he wasn't coming back." Russell's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Some men don't deserve the title, Miss Blackwood." "Please call me Nora," she said, meeting his gaze. "And I should have known better. My father warned me about Thomas's character, but I was too stubborn to listen." "We all make mistakes," Russell replied. "What matters is how we recover from them." The days that followed fell into a surprising rhythm. Martha, a widow with grown children of her own living back east, took Nora and Sarah under her wing with grandmotherly affection. She showed Nora how to prepare bottles properly, shared folk remedies for Sarah's teething discomfort, and gradually involved her in the running of the household. Russell, for his part, maintained a respectful distance, but Nora often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He spent his days working the ranch, but made time each evening to sit with them after supper, sometimes reading aloud from one of his books while Nora mended clothing or helped Martha with preserving the last of the garden's harvest before winter set in. A week stretched into 2, then 3. November arrived with the first dusting of snow. Nora's strength returned, and with it, her determination to find some way to support herself and Sarah. But each time she broached the subject of leaving, Russell found a reason why they should stay a little longer. "Winter's setting in," he pointed out one evening as they sat before the fire. Sarah was asleep in a proper cradle now, one Russell had retrieved from the attic, explaining it had been his own as a baby. "The passes will be dangerous and the stagecoach runs less often. Wait until spring at least." Nora studied him across the hearth, the firelight casting his features in gold. "I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely, Russell. I need to find work, a place of our own." He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There's work here if you want it. Martha's not getting any younger, and she's mentioned more than once how much easier things have been with your help. You'd hire me as, what, a second housekeeper?" "As whatever you want to be," he replied, then flushed slightly. "I mean, your position would be whatever suits your skills." "Martha mentioned you have a fine hand with numbers." Nora nodded. "My father was a banker. He taught me bookkeeping." That's a skill I sorely lack, Russell admitted with a rueful smile. I've been putting off my quarterly accounting for weeks. The ranch ledgers are in a state. And so, without quite deciding it formally, Nora found herself employed at the Wade Ranch, earning a modest salary plus room and board for herself and Sarah. The arrangement brought her a measure of independence she treasured, along with the security her daughter needed. It also brought her into daily contact with Russell, whose presence affected her in ways she wasn't ready to acknowledge. There was something about the careful way he held Sarah when Nora placed the baby in his arms, about the respect with which he treated Martha and his ranch hands, about the quiet intelligence he revealed during their evening conversations that drew her to him despite her best intentions. Thomas had been charming and exciting, full of grand plans and sweeping gestures. Russell was steady, thoughtful, a man whose words matched his actions. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more appealing to a woman who had learned the hard way that flash and charm often disguised an empty core. December arrived with a bitter cold snap that kept everyone close to the house. 2 days before Christmas, a blizzard swept down from the mountains, howling around the sturdy log cabin like a living thing. Nora sat at the kitchen table, Sarah bouncing on her knee while she reviewed the ranch's yearly expenses for Russell's tax filing. "This can't be right," she murmured, frowning at a column of figures. Russell looked up from the harness he was repairing. "What's the trouble? These payments to Dr. Wilson. They're substantial and they continued until just a few months ago, but there's no indication what they were for." She glanced up, concerned she might be prying into something personal. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to, it's all right," he interrupted, setting aside his work. His expression had grown somber. "Those were for my wife's medical care." Nora stared at him, stunned. "Your wife?" "Rebecca," he said quietly. "She passed away in July, consumption." "Russell, I had no idea." Nora's heart ached for him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he shrugged, his gaze fixed on his hands. "It didn't seem right to burden you with my troubles when you were dealing with so much already." Nora rose, settling Sarah in her cradle before moving to sit beside him. "I'm so sorry for your loss. We were married just 2 years," he continued, as if a dam had broken. "She was from back east, not used to the hardships out here, but she never complained. When she fell ill last winter, I tried everything, brought in specialists from as far as Denver. Nothing helped." Nora reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "That's why Martha was so quick to help us, isn't it? She knew what it was like to have a woman in the house again." Russell nodded, turning his hand to grasp hers. "She worried about me being alone, but I never expected." He trailed off, looking at her with such naked emotion that Nora's breath caught. "Never expected what?" she whispered. "To find someone like you," he admitted. "Someone strong enough to survive what you've been through. Someone who brings light back into this place." Before Nora could respond, Sarah began to fuss, breaking the moment. Russell released her hand, and she went to tend to her daughter, her mind whirling with the implications of his words and the warmth that had bloomed in her chest at his touch. That night, lying awake in her bed, Nora confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Russell Wade. The realization terrified her. She had trusted her heart once before and been devastated. Could she risk it again? And even if she could, was it fair to Russell, whose grief was still so raw? Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. The world outside transformed into a glistening wonderland of snow. Nora woke to find Sarah already gone from her cradle and sounds of quiet laughter coming from the kitchen. She dressed quickly and followed the noise. The sight that greeted her stopped her in the doorway. Russell sat at the table, Sarah perched on his knee while he pretended to share his coffee with her. Martha bustled around the stove, humming a Christmas carol. "There's your mama," Russell said to Sarah, spotting Nora. "Should we show her what Santa brought?" He stood, balancing the baby expertly in one arm, and retrieved a small package from the mantel. "Merry Christmas, Nora." She accepted the gift with trembling hands. Inside the carefully wrapped package was a beautiful silver locket on a delicate chain. "Open it," Russell urged softly. Inside was a tiny lock of Sarah's dark hair, carefully secured beneath the glass. "Russell, it's beautiful," Nora whispered, tears threatening, "but I have nothing for you." You've given me more than you know, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. You and Sarah both. Martha cleared her throat pointedly. The biscuits are getting cold, and I didn't slave over this feast just to watch it go to waste. Sit down, both of you. The day passed in a haze of good food, warm company, and simple pleasures. After dinner, when Martha had retired to her room and Sarah was sleeping peacefully, Russell and Nora found themselves alone by the fire once more. I have a confession, Russell said, breaking the comfortable silence. I've been thinking about the future, yours and Sarah's, and mine too. Nora looked up from her mending, her heart suddenly racing. Oh, I know it's too soon, he continued, his gaze steady on hers. I know you need time to heal from what your husband did, and I'm still finding my way after Rebecca. But I want you to know that you and Sarah have a place here for as long as you want it. As your employee, Nora asked, needing clarity despite the hope blooming in her chest. Russell shook his head slowly. As whatever you're comfortable being, friend, companion, he hesitated. Family, perhaps one day, the word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. I care for you, Nora, he said simply. More than I expected to care for anyone again. But I won't rush you, I just wanted you to know where I stand. Nora set aside her work and moved to sit beside him on the sofa. When Thomas left us, I thought my life was over, she admitted. I couldn't see any path forward that didn't end in tragedy, but then you found us. She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. You fed us, sheltered us, gave us purpose and dignity. You called us family when we had none. How could I not care for you in return? The hope that blazed in his eyes made her catch her breath. Is that a yes to staying then? It's a yes to seeing where this leads, she replied carefully. To giving ourselves time to be sure. His smile was like sunrise. That's all I ask. As winter gave way to spring, Nora watched the relationship between Russell and her daughter deepen into something that made her heart ache with tenderness. Sarah, now crawling and babbling, would light up whenever Russell entered a room, reaching for him with complete trust. And Russell, for his part, treated the child as if she were his own flesh and blood, spending precious hours of his busy days playing with her, reading to her, teaching her the names of the animals on the ranch. She said horse today, he announced proudly one evening in April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Clear as anything when I showed her the new foal. Nora smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder. In the months since Christmas, they had grown more comfortable with such casual touches, a hand at the small of her back as they walked, his arm around her shoulders during evening reading sessions, the brush of his fingers against hers as they passed the salt at dinner. She adores you, Nora observed. Sometimes I think she'd choose you over me if given the option. Russell chuckled, his arm slipping around her waist. Never, you're her mother. That's a bond nothing can break. Nora hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. Did you and Rebecca ever talk about having children? Russell was quiet for a moment. We did. She wanted a houseful. It was hard for her when months passed and she didn't conceive. Then she got sick and, he shrugged. It wasn't meant to be. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. You would have been a wonderful father. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. I'd like to think I still could be, the air between them charged with meaning. Before Nora could respond, hoofbeats sounded on the path leading to the house. Russell stood, hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip as a rider came into view. It's just Jim, he said, relaxing as he recognized his ranch hand. Must be back from town with the mail. Jim Harker, a grizzled cowboy who'd worked the ranch since Russell's father's time, dismounted with a nod to them both. Evening, boss. Miss Nora. Got a letter here might interest you, madam. He handed Nora an envelope addressed in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it with a sense of foreboding that proved justified as she read the brief message inside. It's from a lawyer in Cheyenne, she said, her voice tight. Thomas is dead, shot in a saloon fight 2 months ago. Russell's hand found her shoulder, warm and supportive. I'm sorry, Nora. She looked up at him, confusion warring with a strange sense of relief. I don't know how to feel. He abandoned us, left us to die, but still. He was Sarah's father, Russell finished for her, and once you loved him. Nora nodded, grateful for his understanding. The lawyer says there's some personal effects to claim if I want them. Nothing of value most likely, but perhaps something Sarah should have when she's older. We'll go to Cheyenne, Russell decided. When you're ready. The journey was arranged for the following week. Martha would stay behind with Sarah while Russell accompanied Nora to the city. The night before their departure, Nora found herself restless, wandering the house after everyone else had retired. She ended up in the small study where she worked on the ranch accounts, staring out the window at the star-filled sky. The sound of the door opening made her turn. Couldn't sleep either, Russell asked, stepping into the room. He was partially dressed, suspenders hanging at his sides, shirt only half-buttoned. Too many thoughts, Nora admitted. About tomorrow, about Thomas, about, she hesitated, about us. Russell moved closer, his expression cautious but hopeful. What about us? I've been a widow in all but name since the day Thomas walked away, she said slowly. But now it's official. I'm free legally and morally. And how does that make you feel? He asked, his voice low. Scared, she admitted, but also hopeful. Ready, perhaps, to stop dwelling in the past and look to the future. Russell took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. Nora, I've tried to be patient, to give you the time and space you needed, but I think we both know what's growing between us. I do, she whispered. I love you, he said simply. I love Sarah. I want us to be a real family, not just in private, but in the eyes of God and the community. Nora's heart swelled. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Russell smiled, a touch of nervousness in his expression. I had planned to do this properly after our trip. I have my mother's ring in the safe, but since we're here now. He knelt before her, still holding her hands. Nora Blackwood, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Sarah and perhaps, God willing, more children someday? Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she managed. Yes to all of it. His kiss was everything she had imagined during lonely nights, tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Russell rested his forehead against hers. I'll make you both so happy, he vowed. Everything I have, everything I am is yours. You already have, Nora whispered. From the moment you found us on that trail, you've been our salvation. Their trip to Cheyenne the next day carried a new sense of purpose. While the business with the lawyer was Sommer Thomas's effects amounted to little more than a pocket watch, a few letters, and a worn photograph of him holding Sarah as a newborn, the journey back felt like the beginning of something precious. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in the nearest town, with Martha beaming in the front pew, Sarah on her lap. The ranch hands stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, hats in hand, as Russell and Nora exchanged simple vows before the preacher and their neighbors. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. As Russell kissed her, cheers erupted from the small gathering. Nora felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home after a long, difficult journey. The celebration afterward at the ranch was modest but joyful. As the spring evening deepened into twilight, Russell led Nora away from their guests to the small garden behind the house. I have something to show you, he said, guiding her toward a newly built structure at the garden's edge. It was a small playhouse, perfectly sized for a child, with tiny windows and a door Sarah would soon be tall enough to walk through. Did you build this? Nora asked, touched by the gesture. Russell nodded, looking pleased but slightly embarrassed. I wanted Sarah to have something special to mark the day. And, he hesitated. I thought we might need it for more than one child, eventually. Nora's heart swelled with love for this man who thought so carefully about her daughter's happiness, who looked to their future with such hope. It's perfect, she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. Just like everything else about today. Later that night, after their guests had departed, and Sarah was sleeping soundly in her room, moved from Nora's former quarters to a space just down the hall from the master bedroom, husband and wife found themselves alone at last. Are you happy, Mrs. Wade? Russell asked as he drew her into his arms. Happier than I ever thought possible, Nora confessed, resting her head against his chest. A year ago I was desperate, starving, certain Sarah and I would die alone. Now look at us. I thank God every day that I found you on that trail, Russell murmured against her hair. Though sometimes I think you found me just as much as I found you. As spring blossomed into summer, the Wade Ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. Nora's efficient management of the accounts revealed opportunities for growth that Russell had overlooked, while her vegetable garden produced bountifully. Sarah, now walking confidently and adding new words to her vocabulary daily, became the joy of everyone on the property. In July, as they celebrated Russell's 32nd birthday with a picnic by the creek that ran through their land, Nora presented him with a small package. "Another gift?" he asked, surprised. "The new saddle this morning was more than enough." "This one's special," Nora replied, her eyes shining with secret knowledge. Russell unwrapped the package to find a tiny pair of knitted booties. "Nora," he whispered, looking from the booties to her face, hardly daring to hope. She nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're having a baby, Russell, in January." The joy that transformed his face was everything she had hoped for. Russell gathered her in his arms, laughing and crying at once, then dropped to his knees to kiss her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your papa can't wait to meet you." Sarah toddled over, curious about the commotion, and Russell scooped her up with one arm, keeping the other around Nora's waist. "What do you think, Miss Sarah? Would you like a baby brother or sister?" Sarah's response was an enthusiastic but incomprehensible babble that made them both laugh. "I'll take that as a yes," Russell said, pressing a kiss to the child's dark curls, so like her mother's, before rising to embrace his family properly. "My girls," he murmured, "my precious girls, and maybe a little cowboy too." The months that followed were busy ones. The fall cattle drive was successful, bringing in enough money to add a new section to the house, a larger kitchen, and another bedroom in anticipation of their growing family. Russell insisted on hiring extra help so Nora wouldn't overexert herself, despite her protests that pregnancy didn't make her an invalid. "Humor me," he said, massaging her swollen feet one evening as they sat before the fire. "I missed this with Rebecca. Let me fuss over you just a little." Nora relented, understanding his need to protect her and their unborn child. "Only if you promise not to wrap me in cotton wool completely. I'm pregnant, not made of glass." As her belly grew, so did Sarah's understanding of what was happening. Russell would sit with the toddler on his knee each evening, helping her place gentle hands on Nora's stomach to feel the baby kick. "Baby," Sarah would say solemnly, her big brown eyes wide with wonder. "That's right, sweetheart," Russell would reply. "Your baby brother or sister is saying hello." The tenderness with which Russell treated both Nora and Sarah during this time only deepened her love for him. He was everything Thomas had not been: reliable, thoughtful, putting his family's needs before his own without complaint or expectation of reward. When winter arrived, bringing with it biting cold and heavy snow, Russell insisted on moving their bedroom temporarily to the main floor so Nora wouldn't have to navigate the stairs multiple times a day. He converted his study into a cozy sleeping space, making sure it was close to both the kitchen and the washroom for her convenience. "You've thought of everything," Nora said, touched by his consideration as he showed her the rearranged space. "Not quite everything," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "Martha pointed out we should have a cradle in here too for the first few weeks. I'll bring down the one Sarah used tomorrow." As Christmas approached, the ranch was transformed with simple but meaningful decorations. Russell and Jim cut a perfect pine from their land, setting it up in the corner of the sitting room. Martha taught Sarah to string popcorn and cranberries for garlands, while Nora, now in her 8th month, directed operations from her rocking chair. "This will be the best Christmas yet," Russell declared as he lifted Sarah to place a star atop the tree. "Our first as a complete family." Nora rested her hands on her rounded belly, feeling their second child shift beneath her touch. "Almost complete," she corrected with a smile. "Just a few more weeks." But babies, as Martha was fond of saying, kept their own counsel when it came to timing. 3 days after Christmas, in the midst of a fierce blizzard that had isolated the ranch for nearly a week, Nora went into labor. "It's too early," she gasped as the first contraction seized her. "The baby's not due for another 2 weeks." "Babies come when they're ready," Martha said calmly, already gathering clean linens and hot water. and this one's decided today's the day. Russell, pale but determined, sent Jim on horseback to fetch the doctor from town, though all of them knew the chances of his getting through the storm were slim. "It'll be all right," Russell assured Nora, holding her hand as Martha prepared the bedroom. Martha's delivered more babies than the doctor anyway. The labor progressed too quickly for the doctor to have reached them even without the storm. 5 hours after the first pain struck, Nora gave a final, exhausted push, and their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Russell's eyes. "A boy," Martha announced, quickly cleaning and swaddling the infant. "A fine, healthy boy." She placed the child in Nora's arms, and Russell knelt beside the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently stroking his son's downy head. "He's perfect," Russell whispered, voice choked with emotion. "Just like his mother. What shall we call him?" Nora asked, gazing down at their creation. Russell considered for a moment. "Robert," he suggested, "after my father, unless you'd prefer something else." "Robert Wade." Nora tested the name, smiling when the baby's eyes opened briefly at the sound of her voice. "I think he approves." Later, when Nora had rested and the baby had nursed for the first time, Russell brought Sarah in to meet her brother. The toddler approached the bed cautiously, eyes wide with curiosity. "Sarah, this is Robert," Nora said gently. "Your baby brother." Sarah peered at the tiny bundle, then looked up at Russell. "Papa baby." It was the first time she had called him Papa, and the effect on Russell was profound. He gathered the little girl into his arms, holding her close as tears slipped unashamedly down his cheeks. "That's right, sweetheart," he managed. "Papa's baby, just like your papa's big girl." Nora watched the scene through tears of her own, her heart so full it felt it might burst. From the depths of despair, abandoned and starving beside a lonely trail, she had found not just survival but joy beyond measure. The blizzard raged on outside, but within the walls of the Wade Ranch, all was warmth and wonder and love. Spring arrived with its usual glory, painting the Wyoming landscape in vibrant greens and wildflower hues. Robert, now 4 months old, was a cheerful, robust baby, adored by his parents and completely worshipped by his big sister, who had appointed herself his chief protector and entertainer. Nora sat on the porch, nursing Robert while watching Russell and Sarah in the yard. The little girl rode proudly atop Russell's shoulders as he pointed out the new calves in the nearby pasture. "See those little ones," he was saying. "They'll grow up big and strong, just like you and Robbie." Sarah giggled, her small hands tangled in Russell's hair. "Papa down," he obliged, swinging her carefully to the ground, where she immediately began picking wildflowers with serious concentration. Russell watched her for a moment, then turned toward the porch, his expression softening as he caught sight of Nora and the baby. "How are my other 2 favorite people?" he asked, climbing the steps to join them. "Hungry and content, respectively," Nora replied with a smile. "He's growing so fast, Russell. Soon he'll be running after Sarah." Russell settled beside her on the bench, his arm finding its familiar place around her shoulders. "Time moves too quickly," he agreed, brushing a finger gently across Robert's cheek. "Seems like just yesterday I found you both on that trail." Nora leaned into his embrace, remembering that desperate day with a clarity that still took her breath away. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Not just of dying, but of failing Sarah, of not being strong enough to save her." "You were plenty strong," Russell countered. "You kept walking when most would have given up. You protected her with everything you had." "But it wasn't enough," Nora said softly. "If you hadn't come along when you did." Russell tightened his hold on her. "But I did, and you know what I think." "I think it wasn't chance at all. I think God meant for us to find each other that day." Nora looked up at him, struck by the certainty in his voice. "Do you really believe that?" "With all my heart," he replied simply. "I was lonely, grieving, convinced I'd never have a family of my own." "You were desperate, abandoned, certain you'd lost everything. But together, look what we've built, Nora. Look at our children, our home. This is what we were meant for." As if in agreement, Robert released her breast with a satisfied sigh, milk-drunk and drowsy. Nora adjusted her clothing and shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "You know, sometimes I think about that first night," she mused. When you fed us both and told Martha we were staying, you called us your family even then. Did you realize that? Russell looked thoughtful. Did I? I don't remember the exact words, but I knew from the moment I saw you that you belonged here, that I wanted to take care of you both. And now look at us, Nora said, gesturing to where Sarah was presenting her gathered bouquet to Martha, who had come outside to call them in for dinner. A proper family, just as you said. Russell's smile held a lifetime of promise. The best decision I ever made was bringing you home that day, and the best words I ever spoke were calling you my family. He pressed a kiss to her temple, then another to Robert's downy head. Because that's what you are, what you'll always be, my heart, my home, my family. Forever. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting the ranch in golden light, Nora Wade looked at the man beside her and the children they shared, one born of her body, one born of her heart, both equally cherished and knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. From starvation to salvation, from abandonment to abundance, her journey had brought her here. To this land, to this life, to this love. And in the feeding of a starving mother and child, in the simple act of calling them family when they had none, Russell Wade had written the first lines of a story that would continue for generations to come. The Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of spring and the promise of tomorrow. On the porch of the Wade Ranch, a family that began in desperate circumstances settled into the peaceful rhythm of a life built on love, faith, and the courage to begin again.